The history of Cambodia, a country in mainland Southeast Asia, can be traced back to at least the 5th millennium BC. Detailed records of a political structure on the territory of what is now Cambodia first appear in Chinese annals in reference to Funan, a polity that encompassed the southernmost part of the Indochinese peninsula during the 1st to 6th centuries. Centered at the lower Mekong, Funan is noted as the oldest regional Hindu culture, which suggests prolonged socio-economic interaction with maritime trading partners of the Indosphere in the west. By the 6th century, a civilization called Chenla or Zhenla in Chinese annals firmly replaced Funan as it controlled larger, more undulating areas of Indochina and maintained more than a singular center of power. The Khmer Empire was established by the early 9th century. Sources refer here to a mythical initiation and consecration ceremony to claim political legitimacy by founder Jayavarman II at Mount Kulin in 802 CE. A succession of powerful sovereigns, continuing the Hindu Devaraja cult tradition, reigned over the classical era of Khmer civilization until the 11th century. A new dynasty of provincial origin introduced Buddhism, which according to some scholars resulted in royal religious discontinuities and general decline. The royal chronology ends in the 14th century. Great achievements in administration, agriculture, architecture, hydrology, logistics, urban planning and the arts are testimony to a creative and progressive civilization, in its complexity a cornerstone of Southeast Asian cultural legacy. The decline continued through a transitional period of approximately 100 years followed by the middle period of Cambodian history, also called the Dark Ages of Cambodia, beginning in the mid-15th century. Although the Hindu cults had by then been all but replaced, the monument sites at the old capital remained an important spiritual center. Yet since the mid-15th century the core population steadily moved to the east and, with brief exceptions, settled at the confluence of the Mekong and Chenla Sap rivers at Chaktamak, Longvik and Naodong. Maritime trade was the basis for a very prosperous 16th century, but, as a result, foreigners, Muslim Malays and Cham, Christian European adventurers and missionaries, increasingly disturbed and influenced government affairs. Ambiguous fortunes, a robust economy on the one hand and a disturbed culture and compromised royalty on the other were constant features of the Longvik era. By the 15th century, the Khmer's traditional neighbors, the Mon people in the west and the Cham people in the east, had gradually been pushed aside or replaced by the resilient Siamese Thai and Annamese Vietnamese, respectively. These powers had perceived, understood and increasingly followed the imperative of controlling the lower Mekong basin as the key to control all Indochina. A weak Khmer kingdom only encouraged the strategists in Ayutthaya and in Hue. Attacks on and conquests of Khmer royal residences left sovereigns without a ceremonial and legitimate power base. Interference in succession and marriage policies added to the decay of royal prestige. Naodong was established in 1601 as the last royal residence of the Middle Period. The 19th century arrival of then technologically more advanced and ambitious European colonial powers with concrete policies of global control put an end to regional feuds, and as Siam, Thailand, although humiliated and on the retreat, escaped colonization as a buffer state, Vietnam was to be the focal point of French colonial ambition. Cambodia, although largely neglected, had entered the Indochinese Union as a perceived entity and was capable to carry and reclaim its identity and integrity into modernity. After 80 years of colonial hibernation, the brief episode of Japanese occupation during World War II, that coincided with the investiture of King Sihanouk, was the opening act for the irreversible process towards re-emancipation and modern Cambodian history. The Kingdom of Cambodia Cambodia, independent since 1953, struggled to remain neutral in a world shaped by polarization of the nuclear powers USA and Soviet Union. As the Indo-Chinese War escalates, Cambodia becomes increasingly involved. The Khmer Republic is one of the results in 1970, another is civil war. 1975, abandoned and in the hands of the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia endures its darkest hour, democratic Kampuchea in its long aftermath of Vietnamese occupation, the People's Republic of Kampuchea and the UN mandate towards modern Cambodia since 1993. Prehistory and early history. Radiocarbon dating of a cave at Langspeen in Battambang Province, northwest Cambodia confirmed the presence of Hoabenian stone tools from 6000–7000 BC in pottery from 4200 BC. Starting in 2009, archaeological research of the Franco-Cambodian Prehistoric Mission has documented a complete cultural sequence from more than 100,000 years to the Neolithic period in the cave. Finds since 2012 lead to the common interpretation that the cave contains the archaeological remains of a first occupation by hunter and gatherer groups, followed by Neolithic people with highly developed hunting strategies and stone tool-making techniques, as well as highly artistic pottery making and design, and with elaborate social, cultural, symbolic and funerary practices. Skulls and human bones found at Sam Rong Sen in Kampong Shnang Province date from 1500 BC. Heng Sofadi has drawn comparisons between Sam Rong Sen and the circular earthwork sites of eastern Cambodia. These people may have migrated from southeastern China to the Indochinese peninsula. Scholars trace the first cultivation of rice and the first bronze making in Southeast Asia to these people. 2010 examination of skeletal material from graves at Phum Snay in northwest Cambodia revealed an exceptionally high number of injuries, especially to the head, likely to have been caused by interpersonal violence. The graves also contain a quantity of swords and other offensive weapons used in conflict. The Iron Age period of Southeast Asia begins around 500 BC and lasts until the end of the Funan era, around 500 AD, as it provides the first concrete evidence for sustained maritime trade and socio-political interaction with India and South Asia. By the 1st century, settlers have developed complex, organized societies and a varied religious cosmology that required advanced spoken languages very much related to those of the present day. The most advanced groups lived along the coast and in the lower Mekong River Valley and the Delta regions in houses on stilts where they cultivated rice, fished and kept domesticated animals. Funan Kingdom. Chinese annals contain detailed records of the first known organized polity, the Thalassocratic Kingdom of Funan, on Cambodian and Vietnamese territory characterized by high population and urban centers, the production of surplus food, socio-political stratification legitimized by Indian religious ideologies, centered around the lower Mekong and Bassac rivers from the 1st to 6th century CE, with walled and moated cities such as Angkor Boré in Ta Keo Province and No Ceo in modern Giang Province, Vietnam. Early Funan was composed of loose communities, each with its own ruler, linked by a common culture and a shared economy of rice farming people in the hinterland and traders in the coastal towns, who were economically interdependent as surplus rice production found its way to the ports. By the 2nd century CE, Funan controlled the strategic coastline of Indochina and the maritime trade routes. Cultural and religious ideas reached Funan via the Indian Ocean trade route. Trade with India had commenced well before 500 BC as Sanskrit hadn't yet replaced Pali. Indian author Dr. Pragya Mishra observes, Funan was one of the colonies established by Indians within Cambodia. In his essay, Cultural History of Indian Diaspora in Cambodia, Funan's language has been determined as to have been an early form of Khmer and its written form was Sanskrit. In the period 245 to 250 CE, dignitaries of the Chinese kingdom of Wu visited the Funan city via Arapura. Envoys Kangtai and Zhou Ying defined Funan as to be a distinct Hindu culture. Trade with China had begun after the southward expansion of the Han dynasty, around the 2nd century BC. Effectively, Funan controlled strategic land routes in addition to coastal areas, and occupied a prominent position as an economic and administrative hub between the Indian Ocean trade network and China, collectively known as the Maritime Silk Road. Trade routes that eventually ended in distant Rome, corroborated by Roman and Persian coins and artifacts unearthed at archaeological sites of 2nd and 3rd century settlements. Funan is associated with myths, such as the Katigara legend and the Khmer founding legend, in which an Indian Brahmana prince named Priyathaung in Khmer, Kaundinya in Sanskrit and Huntian in Chinese records marries the local ruler, a princess named Nagi Soma, thus establishing the first Cambodian royal dynasty. Scholars debate as to how deep the narrative is rooted in actual events and on Kaundinya's origin and status. A Chinese document that underwent 4 alterations and a 3rd century epigraphic inscription of Kampa of the contemporary sources. Some scholars consider the story to be simply an allegory for the diffusion of Indic Hindu and Buddhist beliefs into ancient local cosmology and culture, whereas some historians dismiss it chronologically. Chinese annals report that Funan reached its territorial climax in the early 3rd century under the rule of King Fan Shiman, extending as far south as Malaysia and as far west as Burma. A system of mercantilism in commercial monopolies was established. Exports ranged from forest products to precious metals and commodities such as gold, elephants, ivory, rhinoceros horn, kingfisher feathers, wild spices like cardamom, lacquer, hides and aromatic wood. Under Fan Shiman, Funan maintained a formidable fleet and was administered by an advanced bureaucracy based on attribute-based economy that produced a surplus which was used to support foreign traders along its coasts and ostensibly to launch expansionist missions to the west and south. Historians maintain contradicting ideas about Funan's political status and integrity. Miriam T. Stark calls it simply Funan. Notion of Funan as an early state has been built largely by historians using documentary and historical evidence, and Michael Vickery remarks, nevertheless, it is unlikely that the several ports constituted a unified state, much less an empire. Other sources, though, imply imperial status. The vassal kingdom spread to southern Vietnam in the east and to the Malay Peninsula in the west, and here we will look at 2 empires of this period, Funan and Srivijaya. The question of how Funan came to an end is, in the face of almost universal scholarly conflict, impossible to pin down. Chenla is the name of Funan's successor in Chinese annals, first appearing in 616–617 CE. The fall of Funan was not the result of the shifting of maritime trade route from the Malay Peninsula route to the Strait of Malacca starting from the 5th century CE. Rather, it suggests that the conquest of Funan by Zhenla was the exact reason for the shifting of maritime trade route in the 7th century CE. As Funan was indeed in decline caused by shifts in Southeast Asian maritime trade routes, rulers had to seek new sources of wealth inland. By the end of the 5th century, international trade through Southeast Asia was almost entirely directed through the Strait of Malacca. Funan, from the point of view of this trade, had outlived its usefulness. Nothing in the epigraphical record authorizes such interpretations, and the inscriptions which retrospectively bridge the so-called Funan Chenla transition do not indicate a political break at all. The archaeological approach to and interpretation of the entire early historic period is considered to be a decisive supplement for future research. The Lower Mekong Archaeological Project focuses on the development of political complexity in this region during the early historic period. LOMAP survey results of 2003 to 2005, for example, have helped to determine that the region's importance continued unabated throughout the pre-Angkorian period, and that at least 3 bear Angkorian period dates and suggest the continued importance of the Delta Chenla Kingdom. The history of the Chinese Sui dynasty contains records that a state called Chenla sent an embassy to China in 616 or 617 CE. It says that Chenla was a vassal of Funan, but under its ruler Citrusina Mahendravarman conquered Funan and gained independence. Most of the Chinese recordings on Chenla, including that of Chenla conquering Funan, have been contested since the 1970s, as they are generally based on single remarks in the Chinese annals. As author Claude Jacques emphasized the very vague character of the Chinese terms Funan and Chenla, while more domestic epigraphic sources become available. Claude Jacques summarizes, very basic historical mistakes have been made because the history of pre-Angkorian Cambodia was reconstructed much more on the basis of Chinese records than on that of inscriptions, and as new inscriptions were discovered, researchers preferred to adjust the newly discovered facts to the initial outline rather than to call the Chinese reports into question. The notion of Chenla center being in modern Laos has also been contested. All that is required is that it be inland from Funan, the most important political record of pre-Angkor Cambodia. The inscription K53 from Ba Phnom, dated AD 667, does not indicate any political discontinuity, either in royal succession of kings Rudravarman, Bhavavarman I, Mahendravarman, Sanavarman, and Jayavarman I, or in the status of the family of officials who produced the inscription. Another inscription of a few years later, K44, 674 AD, commemorating a foundation in Kampot province under the patronage of Jayavarman I, refers to an earlier foundation in the time of King Rudravarma, presumably Rudravarman of Funan, and again there is no suggestion of political discontinuity. The history of the Tiang asserts that shortly after 706 the country was split into La Chenla and Water Chenla. The names signify a northern and a southern half, which may conveniently be referred to as Upper and Lower Chenla. By the late 8th century, Water Chenla had become a vassal of the Sailendra dynasty of Java. The last of its kings was killed and the polity incorporated into the Javanese monarchy around AD 790. Land Chenla acquired independence under Jayavarman II in 802 CE. The Khmers, vassals of Funan, reached the Mekong River from the northern Menem River via the Mun River Valley. Chenla, the first independent state developed out of Funan's influence. Ancient Chinese records mention 2 kings, Shrutavarman and Shresthavarman, who ruled at the capital Shrestapura, located in modern-day southern Laos. The immense influence on the identity of Cambodia to come was wrought by the Khmer kingdom of Bhavapura, in the modern-day Cambodian city of Kampong Thom. Its legacy was its most important sovereign, Ashanavarman, who completely conquered the kingdom of Funan during 612 to 628. He chose his new capital at the Sambor Pre-Ekuk, naming it Ashanapura. Khmer Empire. The 6 centuries of the Khmer Empire are characterized by unparalleled technical and artistic progress and achievements, political integrity and administrative stability. The empire represents the cultural and technical apogee of the Cambodian and Southeast Asian pre-industrial civilization. The Khmer Empire was preceded by Chenla, a polity with shifting centers of power, which was split into La Chenla and Water Chenla in the early 8th century. By the late 8th century, Water Chenla was absorbed by the Malays of the Srivijaya Empire and the Javanese of the Shailandra Empire and eventually incorporated into Java and Srivijaya. Jayavarman II, ruler of La Chenla, initiates a mythical Hindu consecration ceremony at Mount Kulin in 802 CE. He intended to proclaim political autonomy and royal legitimacy, as he declared himself Devaraha, God-King, divinely appointed and uncontested. He simultaneously declares independence from Shailandra and Srivijaya. He established Hariharalaya, the first capital of the Angkorian area near the modern town of Roluos. Jayavarman II's successors continued to reside north of the Tonle Sap Lake. This population center was subject to extensive urban planning, embedded in an elaborate hydraulic network of water reservoirs and canals around central monumental religious structures. The religious monuments underwent over the course of several centuries a sophisticated architectural, stylistic and aesthetic development of eventually most exquisite expression and mastery of composition. Indravarman I and his son and successor Yasovarman I, who established the capital Yasodharapura, ordered the construction of huge water reservoirs north of the capital. The water management network depended on elaborate configurations of channels, ponds and embankments built from huge quantities of clayey sand, the available bulk material on the Angkor Plain. Dikes of the East-By still exist today, which are more than 7 kilometers long and 1.8 kilometers wide. The largest component is the west-By, a reservoir about 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers across, containing approximately 50 million cubic meters of water. Royal administration was based on the religious idea of the Shaivite Hindu state and the central cult of the sovereign as warlord and protector. The Varman. This centralized system of governance appointed royal functionaries to provinces. The Mahidharapura dynasty, its first king was Jayavarman VI, which originated west of the Dangrek Mountains in the Mun River Valley, discontinued the old ritual policy, genealogical traditions and crucially, Hinduism as exclusive state religion. Some historians relate the empire's decline to these religious discontinuities. The area that comprises the various capitals was spread out over around 1,000 square kilometers. It is nowadays commonly called Angkor. The combination of sophisticated wet rice agriculture, based on an engineered irrigation system, and the Tonle Sap's spectacular abundance in fish and aquatic fauna, as protein source guaranteed a regular food surplus. Recent geosurveys have confirmed that Angkor maintained the largest pre-industrial settlement complex worldwide during the 12th and 13th centuries. Some 750,000 people lived there. Sizable contingents of the public workforce were to be redirected to monument building and infrastructure maintenance. A growing number of researchers relates the progressive overexploitation of the delicate local ecosystem and its resources alongside large-scale deforestation and resulting erosion to the empire's eventual decline. Under King Suryavarman II, the empire reached its greatest geographic extent as it directly or indirectly controlled Indochina, the Gulf of Thailand and large areas of northern maritime Southeast Asia. Suryavarman II commissioned the Temple of Angkor Wat, built in a period of 37 years. Its 5 towers representing Mount Meru is considered to be the most accomplished expression of classical Khmer architecture. However, territorial expansion ended when Suryavarman II was killed in battle attempting to invade Thai Viet. It followed a period of dynastic upheaval and a Cham invasion that culminated in the sack of Angkor in 1177. King Jayavarman VII is generally considered to be Cambodia's greatest king. A Mahayana Buddhist, he initiates his reign by striking back against Kampa in a successful campaign. During his nearly 40 years in power, he becomes the most prolific monument builder, who establishes the city of Angkor Thom with its central temple, the Bayon. Further outstanding works are attributed to him: Antikdean, Ta Prom, Nikpin and Sra Srang. The construction of an impressive number of utilitarian and secular projects and edifices, such as maintenance of the extensive road network of Suryavarman I, in particular the Royal Road to Firema and the many rest houses, bridges and hospitals, make Jayavarman VII unique among all imperial rulers. In August 1296, the Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan arrived at Angkor and remained at the court of King Srindravarman until July 1297. He wrote a detailed report on life in Angkor. His portrayal is one of the most important sources of understanding historical Angkor, as the text offers valuable information on the everyday life and the habits of the inhabitants of Angkor. The last Sanskrit inscription is dated 1327 and records the succession of Indrajavarman by Jayavarman IX Parameshwara. The empire was an agrarian state that consisted essentially of three social classes: the elite, workers and slaves. The elite included advisors, military leaders, courtiers, priests, religious ascetics and officials. Workers included agricultural laborers and also a variety of craftsmen for construction projects. Slaves were often captives from military campaigns or distant villages. Coinage did not exist and the barter economy was based on agricultural produce, principally rice, with regional trade as an insignificant part of the economy.